entered and left organisations without actually having met their teams or met their bosses. So we are expecting, a level of meetings and travel really around that personal connection.
Excellent. Michael, in looking at your customers at TripActions, what's been the impact of COVID on them, and what are your expectations regarding growth and volume from your 2019 customer base?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I think the impact has been the same for like the whole industry, right? So I think it went very rapidly down at the beginning of COVID to close to zero, right? So there was, I think April 2020, there was almost no travel. And I think it is constantly like going up here and there with the waves, pretty much in line with COVID curves, right? So I think no surprise there. I think what we've seen since beginning of the year is it is massively coming back, right? But the answer is actually more nuanced, right? So we look at data pretty much every day in, every day out, right? So we have our daily reports where I see pretty much by vertical, by industry, how are things developing. Reality is actually, I'm very bullish that it's broadly coming back, because when you look at the different verticals and industries, there's industries, let's take consultancies as an example, where probably 2 years ago I would have said, a lot of the consultancies, like that they travel 4 days a week or 5 days a week to the client is questionable, right? Like there's a lot of transactional work, so I get it, maybe a kickoff at the clients and then they could work in their office. Reality of what we're seeing now is they are traveling back to their clients and they're actually spending 4 to 5 days again, right? And this is actually a good example of where 2 years ago I would have said, hey, there must be a Zoom effect. We call it Zoom effect because they go all of them then on Zoom basically. By now I see that in the consulting world it's probably competitive pressure, right? Like if, let's say, BCG is now traveling to the client, then there's no way that McKinsey is not spending time at the client, right? If we discuss the bigger ones. And I think that's what's happening a lot, right? So I think that is one thing. The other thing we see is the type of travel is actually changing. So in the sense of that, I think the whole remote work thing is there to stay. But remote work again means also that there's likely more travel, because this means you're bringing together remote people. So it's more about meeting events. So some of the spend has actually shifted into that direction, right? But again, overall spend, and there's 2 drivers of this. So it's not necessarily just ticket volume, but also that just airline prices and so on are more expensive. It's getting rapidly back, right? So I think that's basically what we see in the data, and I see no reason why this is not continuing in autumn, except that there's another COVID curve. And I think the last interesting thing that maybe makes me pretty optimistic there is so actually one of our bigger clients, and we have various ones in there, is working in the whole video conferencing world, right? And if you look at their travel curve, it's massive. And this kind of shows me that like even like technology companies who would say, hey, they're really used to all the tools and so on. It's just something different than sitting here. There's a reason, like I think probably most people here could dial in via the tool here, I guess, I'm not sure, but there's still a lot of people sitting here, right? And there's a reason why in-person connections matter.
Absolutely. So Pascal, what are you seeing among your clients regarding the return to travel and their expectations of how their travel's going to going forward? How will that change from the way they've traveled in the past?
Yeah, I think that there is you have 2 types of clients really. One type of client, and depending on the fields in which they work, and you can see that in the answers that have just been given. You see the diversity of the answers. So that's not surprising. You see people who say we are on a fast pace to cross the 2019 line, and the other category of clients say we will never get there. You have really these 2 types of the attitude. I expect that 30% in average of travel will go away, all things being equal. When we did that for a couple of clients pre-COVID, we saw that when we picked up the expense and we called people back after 2 months, why did you travel? We did polls, 30% of the travels were not really useful actually. People going for people to a meeting, internal meeting, etc. So 30% off the table just because of the quality of Visio tools. It's so easy. It would be interesting in the future, by the way, to get from these suppliers the breakdown of the conferences by duration of hour of the call and number of people, because you can imagine that the more people on the call and the longer the Zoom meeting, for example, probably it has replaced a meeting. So there is the cannibalization rate you could fathom from there. With regards to the return to travel, you have to make, as it was noted, you have to make the difference between the volumes and the value. All things being equal, you are around in value for the agencies around 45% of revenues, but that doesn't mean that the activity for them, or operational activity, isn't around 70%. Because people call more they go offline, ask questions, change, they have problems, etc. Because the quality of service is so it's a big operational and economical problem for the agencies. So 70% activity, 45% revenue. In the middle, the volumes around 55%. But in the long run, for industrial clients, 30% of the table. Depending whether you are McKinsey or Air Liquide, it's a completely different story, of course, or investment banking or whatever.
So Pascal, Alison previously mentioned that her company has adopted Festive Road's purposeful travel approach, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it is basically a way of taking a look at examining the need for the travel and saying, could that be replaced by virtual conferencing or, as opposed to actually taking the trip. Is that something that you subscribe to? Is that something that your clients are applying to their businesses?
Sort of. In the past, just anecdotally, we have proposed this type of mission for clients to break down. Why do you travel, basically, was the title of the mission, and nobody was interested really 10 years ago. And you could break down, we found, but we did a couple of times, you could find out that you could bring down internal versus external, and you could bring down the travel was linked to the core mission of the person, the job description, because you could go to a marketing event on the West Coast, but if you work in marketing, that's justified. If you maybe less so if it's not part of your job specification, you know what I mean? So it was difficult to work on this topic pre-COVID. And it's excellent that people starting to a little bit in a systematical manner. Okay, what's the segmentation of travel? Why do we travel in the first place? So that's very good. That's very good. I think, however, that it will be difficult for companies to give a strict guidance for sure. But to impose a strict guideline will be difficult to enforce. Something a little bit too rigid, because at the end of the day, traveling yourself or having your people travel is a management decision. You may go one person to Japan because you meet the new president of the subsidiary. Actually, it doesn't go into a segmentation. It's completely justified because the culture of the country may require that. You may organize a small meeting because you think that because there is too much work from home, the links between your people, they are dissolving. It's completely justified. So I think the decision to travel will always be a management solution. I think it's very well to give guidelines, but it still has to be a management decision.
Yeah, based on business need.
But it's good to give guidelines to help people think what segment am I.
Yep. Alison, when we first designed this session, we heard a lot of very pessimistic talk about volumes being permanently reduced from several corporate buyers. Although lately we've heard from some of those same people that the reductions won't be as severe as they previously thought and might not be as permanent as they had thought. That being said, with sustainability goals, there is some real question about whether volumes will completely return. So do you see the reduction at your company as being permanent?
I do see it as being permanent. What that percentage reduction will look like in the end is yet to be determined, but there is a lot of focus in many organizations around sustainability. It's really high up on the agenda, and pre-pandemic, a lot of companies would have realized that if they were measuring it, their carbon emission percentage of travel actually was quite a large percentage of the carbon emission for the company. So it is a focus, and it is a concern for those in the business that it does return to 2019 levels, because we've all set ourselves targets to reach by 2030, by 2050. So we do have to monitor our travel. So what we're doing is, it's not just about cutting budgets, because that's too easy, right? And there's no standardized methodology of measurement of carbon emissions in the industry today. So we have to be a bit smarter about it. And I think it goes back to, it's quite interesting to hear some of the surveys that Concur have put out there, because I think we'll have more conscious travellers, right? And I think we need to be presenting them with information that's tangible, digestible, that they understand, rather than just saying we're gonna cut all of your travel, right? It's got to be sensible. So tips like, you, Mr. Traveller, like, we're doing behavioural analytics at the moment on our travellers, and you, Mr. Traveller, travelled 10 times to New York last year, or 5 times to New York last year. Could you not combine and do 2? Or I think Pascal was saying, rather than 6 people going to a meeting, only 3 of you need to, or even to a deal. Like if we're talking about client-facing deals, right? All of that was conducted during the pandemic virtually, right? So, you know, in working with your clients who will also have their own sustainability goals, right? Some people can dial in, like you've got people who are dialed into the session today. Some people can dial in, some people can be in person, and I think it will be a hybrid. So I think sustainability will play a significant part in why volumes shouldn't return to 2019 levels. But yeah, I think it's work in progress. I don't think anyone can sit here and say it's perfect, because you're trying to balance everything at the moment. But I think it's the cultural shift that you need to instill in your traveller behaviour that will actually help you with those goals.
In the States, there's a lot of lip service about sustainability, and maybe some kind of initial efforts to even try to get a handle on, like you say, on the standards and how to measure reduction. But my understanding is that you're way ahead of us on this side of the Atlantic. How widely have sustainability goals been embraced by ITM members?
Well, it depends on the industry, right? Because if you're in manufacturing, travel represents such a small percentage of your carbon emissions. So the focus would be less on travel, whereas, you know, in financial services, professional services, or whatever, it's a higher percentage. So, you know, it's actually it's around 50-50. Like some of our buyers, it's not high on their agenda, and other parts of our buyer community, it's really high on their agenda, or like top of their agenda. So it is really mixed at the moment, I think. But sustainability it's not just about reducing our carbon emissions. It's about changing behaviour, right? And actually learning from some of the positive elements of COVID, which stopped us all from just jumping on a plane, not even blinking, you know, having your suitcase packed by the door and off you went. Like, I personally did a lot of travel in 2018 and 19, and I know on a personal level, for my well-being, that I don't want to return. So I'm just thinking, these people who travel regularly, who traveled much more than I did, you know, mentally are thinking, I don't want to do it either. So I think that's also going to play a part in it. And, you know, talking to the buyers, it's a similar theme in their organizations.
Yeah, I have a travel manager in the U.S. who has been kind of a pioneer in sustainability, who says it doesn't matter if you don't have a hard and fast standard for measurement, that you need to understand what your footprint is and then reduce. So Amy, I'm curious, in your research, what did you find out about companies as far as their pursuit of net zero goals?
It's really interesting. I mean, if we look at the number of organisations who have set carbon reduction targets in line with the current climate science, represents 38 trillion US dollars. That's more than 40% of the global economy. And just imagine the hundreds of thousands of organizations that are influenced by that through the supply chain. So it is definitely a focus for a lot of our customers. And we did some research a couple of years ago, actually, around this. And during that time, so this was just before the pandemic, one of the things we found was that business travelers, more than 90% of them were willing to extend their journey time if it meant they could travel more sustainably. And from a travel manager perspective, the number one initiative that they were implementing was to switch from plane to train where it was feasible. But I think that now that companies are starting, particularly in the EMEA region, to mature on that sustainability or kind of decarbonisation journey, we're starting to see as a divergence of best practice. And to Alison's point, it's really about understanding your organisation. So getting that data, we're seeing a process that many of the buyers in the room will be familiar with, because it's a process that we've used for a long time to manage travel programmes, of measure, communicate and influence. And we're seeing that process being applied by organisations to really understand where is their benchmark, and which initiatives are going to drive the biggest impact. And some of the insight reports that our customers can get through partnerships with the likes of Thrust Carbon give you that insight into your own business, allow you to run your own race, and the initiatives you then take off the back of that are likely to be different dependent on your program specifically.
Excellent. So, Michael, how do you see your clients embracing sustainability goals and also maintaining growth in their businesses and business travel?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I 100% agree that sustainability is the topic also for the next years to come. And maybe a bit of history. So I think we started massively investing into the toolings around it end of 2018, early 2019. So all these standard things of compensating it, of comparing air and train and all these things. And then we saw like first usage kicking in 2019, which was nice to see. I think then during COVID, interesting enough, these 2 years, since there was obviously overall less usage, no one really cared about sustainability. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this is always when like you had a crisis and so on, it suddenly becomes less relevant. I think now it's very much changing again. I think good news is we continue to invest in it, since this is one of the trends I fundamentally believe in, also for the long run. Right? I think if you were to ask companies, like probably like close to 100% of the companies say sustainability matters, right? If you then look at what actually, and again, we're looking at data all day long, if you then look at the actual data of who really actively changes behavior, it's often a different picture, right? So to give you a sense of like when you ask companies, and I think we did that back in 2019, like who would want to compensate their carbon dioxide? The answer was probably, I think back then 70% of the companies or of the clients said, yes, we want to do it. If you then check, and it's super convenient, like it's very easy to do it via our platform, for example. If you then check on who really does it, it's a different number, right? So I think a lot of, and again, I think it's changing as like governments are requiring more things for large corporates, even more, right, and so on. So I think there is a trend that more companies are really following up on what they are saying. But I think the reality is still, to be very open, there's still a bit different, right? And that being said, I think it's one of the topics that customers do heavily care about, and rightfully, from my perspective. And therefore we are also continuing to heavily invest in that, because in the end it's exactly what Alison, what you said, it's about behavior, and I think there's no one else than the actual platform that can influence behavior, because that's where they book, that's where they make the decision on like what amount of carbon dioxide am I willing to spend, so to say.
But ultimately, the booking processes that organisations take are powered by the policy, aren't they, as well? So, you know, the policy and that communication component and being able to configure the solution to meet those policies is incredibly influential.
Yeah, that's the decision point. So I think we have a big lever on sustainability, right? We can't prevent and don't want to prevent companies from traveling, but we can influence it in a way where it is more sustainable, right? So, and this is also to a certain extent even our duty, right? Like, so I personally care about that a lot, and therefore we as an organization care about it.
So do you see your clients as reducing their volumes to meet their sustainability goals, or do you think that they'll
Yeah.
they'll continue to increase their travel.
So so the honest answer is like it's tough to say this year, as it's like rapidly changing all the time.
Yeah.
So it would be a lie if I could say right now already they are 100% hitting it. What I see is that they do start acting on it, and they are much more actively interacting, asking, looking at the data. So we, for example, see like how often they all have these live stats on like who spends what on carbon dioxide and so on, and they can click in, and we see a lot more usage on these dashboards. Which is a good sign, right? So it's, again, in line with what you said, it's first understanding, or first seeing the data, understanding it, and then you can also take action, right? And this, at least seeing and understanding, we definitely see. And if we take one specific example, which is this air versus train, there we actually see behavioral change, right? So that's the one thing which I think has arrived different companies in the markets where it's applicable, not a thing in the US.
Yeah. And there's available data as well from IATA and UIC that you can see that shift happening, can't you? In terms of the percentage of modal shift, even over the last few years, it's already starting to move over.
I think maybe one last comment. I think that's actually where I think governments, or at least like infrastructure companies, also airlines, could do a lot more. Because I think the reason, if I take Germany as an example, right, there's no reason that there's like inner German flights if the train systems and the networks were better. Right, so in the sense of that, at the moment, if I want to go from Hamburg to Munich by train, it takes me 7 hours or 6 hours, not sure, but like something in between that. For a business traveler, that's tough, right? Versus like a 1 hour flight. But it's not that difficult to have like the train. But there's, I think the plan to have that much more shortened is like 10, 15 years out. Right, and then it's tough to force your travelers to like go for 6 hours on the. So I think that's really where like also there needs to be more support on the infrastructure on actually enabling this.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's got to be translatable. You can have online booking tools, you can have all of this technology, but it's not, certainly in our organisation, it's a split, but a large percentage of travellers don't book their own travel, it's their PAs. And their PAs are following instructions. They're not, it's not translatable, it's not relatable. You need to get in front of the travellers to explain. So online booking tools are not enough. You've got to take another step further.
Very good. Pascal, reduce is such a huge part of sustainability initiatives. Can companies make significant progress in achieving their sustainability goals and maintain the face-to-face relationships that are so critical to doing business and to the health of the business travel industry?
It's a good question. If you think about it, well, they have to, because traveling, meeting people, I can speak about my industry, for example. It's about people advising. The backbone is trust, and it's very difficult to develop new business relationships with people you've never met because they need to trust you. So, of course, they will have to, but the problem is that to come back to the base, and the base comes from the financial world. The stock exchange impose that companies publish non-financial reports, and the investors are pretty big on these numbers. They take it very seriously. So that's one phenomenon. So you have to produce a performance. Secondly, the social awareness of the younger workforce, undoubtedly, even a boomer like me, I can say they are more conscious about it and take it more seriously. So it comes from the boardroom. The importance of showing numbers, whether it's net zero, reducing. They are Bain, for example, they made a commitment in 26. McKinsey has said net zero in 2030. This kind of thing. But at the end of the day, this is something that comes from the boardroom, on the organization. And what happens is that it falls on the procurement and travel management to produce a performance, contribute alongside with operations. And the problem is that there is no you have two axes. One is at the moment of booking, and second is the data to show your performance, to put in a non-financial report. And the problem is that it's not a problem, it's very understandable. We are at the beginning of the journey. the only, it's like a chess game, you know, the only square that we master is air, CO2. Sort of, because it took time that we can differentiate the planes. But the rest, for the rest, the impact, not only CO2, but the impact on resources, on communities, not only air, but hotel, TMC, why not? Technology, because the computers, they burn a lot of CO2. We are only at the beginning of this journey to standardize the data and to agree on common data. When you look, if you take the example of hotel, it's a complete mess today, but it's understandable. There is no database, and I think what will end up happening is we will, at the end of the journey, we will have a Nutri-Score, just like we buy a packet of biscuit, and you have a, in France you have a green, orange, yellow, etc., whether it's good for your health, there's not too sugar, etc. And it will be the same for the impact on sustainability. But we have to, in all industry, have to agree on common data, and I tell you what, that will be steered by the United Nations. That will be the end of the journey, and then once we have this standardized scoring that everybody trusts, then it will be to the consumer, that is the traveler, to make an arbitration between the cost, the security, and the sustainability impact. So it's a long journey, but it's normal.
So in the face of reduced volumes, even if only in the short term, what can buyers offer suppliers in the negotiating process to make up for the smaller volume?
I think Alison could speak better than me on this, but I think that it's all about predictions and therefore trust on prediction. I think they are obviously, what's I think really important for clients is to work inside the company to have a sense of where the numbers are going. Of course, you can't control the inflation, etc., but at least the volumes, you can make assumption. But to work with the business, with operations, to understand how the numbers are going to evolve, to give visibility to the supplier, and that's one. And vice versa, not to be offended by the suppliers who are trying to link some incentive to some sort of volume numbers. That's a normal turn of events, if you will. Of course, there are more tactical things like, okay, you're going to commit on the volume versus values, as Alison was saying. You're going to commit on volumes versus revenues because you don't control inflation. So that's more tactical. But the general philosophy is more transparency and a more dynamic with quarterly meetings, etc., to manage the objectives of the contract. Now that's a question of life or death now, because the markets are moving such a way, such a dynamic way. So visibility, trust, and dynamic relationship.
So Alison, with higher costs that suppliers have had to pay and to meet higher standards of cleanliness, health and safety, and now with inflation, are buyers needing to budget for higher prices?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, in our organisation, we look at total trip costs because we've got the expense side of it as well. And we actually are seeing average trip costs more expensive. If our colleagues who travelling in Asia, I mean, the cost of ground transportation in India has gone through the roof. I mean, I can't even tell you. It's like, it's 90% up. Right, so the average trip costs in general across the piece are growing. You'll find even the Ukraine conflict has caused in some cities where hotels have been commandeered for refugees. I was in Dublin for the ITM conference there a couple of weeks back, and the buyers there were just, Dublin is so expensive now in general, so we have to budget for higher costs, and this is why I'm saying to the leaders in our organisation who set the budgets and setting the budgets for 2023, and that process is starting already. You cannot look at 2019 average ticket price or average trip costs. We have to budget for that inflation, and then that, going back to my earlier point, will also help drive the number of trip reduction. So you need to, if you're looking at reduction overall, you need to look at cost, average cost versus number of trips. And I think you could lower the number of trips and still end up paying the same because the prices are going up.
Michael, are you working with your clients to help them to adjust for their budgets for higher prices?
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality, right? So there's, I think everyone that traveled here and tried to book a hotel, you've probably seen it yourself. So yes, so it's a reality. And I think at least for this year, it's probably being made up by, or you're making up for it by having less travel over the year still. But reality is, yes, I think next year, and the good news again, like if you have live data, you see, right, I think it's absolutely right that you can't build your budget for next year based on 2019, but it's probably changing monthly almost, and which means you should look really at your latest data. So take your last month or take the last quarter at least, like when you try to come up for next year's budget, right? And I think this is exactly what clients are doing and also should be doing, right? So I think that's as close as you can get to reality.
Are they using new or different usage of technology to improve the traveler experience and their supplier relationships?
So in general, yes. So I think in general what happens is that companies are getting more and more used to working with live dashboards, like analyzing data, clicking into it, especially the larger the companies. Of course, they were used to it before, but even like mid-sized companies are now more and more clicking into data and are really trying to understand it, because that's the basis. That's how they can negotiate potentially better rates and so on. I think the one thing we see now recently picking up since the last 3-4 months is we have one dashboard which is we call it cost savings dashboard, where we are flagging obvious things. So give you an example, like train travel, right? If I have one traveler that books more than 5 train trips in, let's take Germany as an example, then it makes sense to have Germany. It's like one of these loyalty cards, like a Bahn card, that gives them 50% discount on these trips, right? So it's pretty easy to detect these things, and there's a set of probably like 20, 30 things you can do to actively save on spend, and I think that is being used more and more as we are heading a more recessionary environment, right? So I think, I think definitely companies are becoming smarter and smarter about how to optimize it, but also because it's easier and easier, right? Like if it takes me hours and hours to like figure out like where do I spend what and so on, then I might as well not do it. But if it's like pretty obvious and it really tells you here, this is your 5 travelers that are overspending on train because they should rather get a card to get the discount, then it's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Oh, Amy, do you have some practical advice for how travel managers should be negotiating during a time of reduced volumes and higher prices?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say to any travel managers in the room is you're not alone. As we've talked about, this is something that is happening in multiple companies, and so demand more broadly from the business travel side at least will be reflected in those supplier conversations. Use events like this to connect with your peers, because I know from my time on the buyer side that it can be quite lonely if you're the only one in an organisation who's trying to come up with the solutions and to answer some of this. So use events like this to network, share your experiences, and perhaps somebody you bump into may have actually solved the problem you're trying to work through at the moment. In terms of negotiating specifically, I would say you're more than just your travel spend. You know, there's so much more value that you can demonstrate to suppliers. Perhaps you could work on a joint case study or be an advocate for potential prospects as a referenceable customer. Perhaps you can demonstrate to your suppliers your power in shifting share or spend from one supplier to another, because as suppliers are potentially looking at a slightly contracted marketplace in certain areas, market share will be key.
Maybe one small thing to add, I think one of the key points, and I think you alluded to it a little bit, is that the overall cake this year is smaller, right? And your piece in the cake probably depends a bit. There might be exceptions, but your percentage of that cake is probably not much smaller, right? Because everyone spends less, meaning that you are not in a worse position than in 2019, right? And that's something you need to play on, right? And so there's no reason why a supplier should treat you significantly worse on average. Again, there might be exceptions, but that's the average picture.
From a services perspective as well, rather than looking at travel suppliers like air and hotel and looking more sort of broadly at TMCs and online booking tools, the ITM actually published a survey back in December that, correct me if I'm wrong, Alison, but I think it was something like 44% of travel buyers roll up to procurement. So use that procurement network and understand within your organisation whether there are other activities happening within your business that you could consolidate your travel spend with. So Alison looks after travel and expense. Of course, Concur has travel and expense, but also other solutions like VAT reclaim. If you think of SAP, then its options are limitless. But perhaps there's an opportunity for you to combine the travel procurement with other elements of procurement within your organisation.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time here, even though I've got lots more questions. But I want to give you in the audience an opportunity to ask questions of this great panel. So does anyone have a question? Or and you who are watching via streaming can use your Swap Card app to ask a question as well. Anybody have a question? Yeah, you see one?
Hi.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, please.
Hi, it's Claire from HSBC. Nice to see everyone. Interested in your chat about rail. The Germany example was a really tangible one. Is anyone using first class rail as an incentive as a standard policy for rail travel? From 2 hours plus. Okay. You've always had it. Okay. Great.
Over 3 hours is first class for us, but
For
we
everyone?
haven't used over 3 hours, but we haven't actually utilised that as a tool as yet to convince our colleagues to switch from air to rail.
Yeah. On the SAP side, our travel policy is first class rail.
For all?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Is there another question?
At the back.
Mm-hmm.
David.
There we go.
It's nice to have questions.
Yeah, thank you. Nikki from ATPI. Does the panel think there will be a time where, has you got experience, anyone being bold enough to put sustainability in the higher priority than cost over cost in the travel programme? Have you seen that?
Time will tell.
But again, citing the ITM survey, I think the members of the ITM have suggested year over year that the percentage of people willing to pay more for more sustainable services is gradually increasing. So it's certainly on an upward trend.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it is. It is in our organisation, right? Because we've already, there'll be a official sustainability committee in every large organisation as a focus right now. So it's not just on travel; it's across the piece. And one of the key elements of discussion right now is that setting that expectation that if we're going to put sustainability agenda first over cost, they need to start looking at it from two angles. They need to create two kind of lenses, if you like. And we've already stated the facts that the more sustainable option potentially is the more expensive option. So one's got to trump the other, and at the moment it's leaning sustainability.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially as I think one of the panels said about actually travellers now making sustainable choices. So I think as well from an employee point of view and traveller choice, the sustainability is going to be higher on the agenda. So I think it's going to be an interesting time, I think.
Yeah. As Pascal mentioned as well, this is being led very much from the boardroom. And so some companies are thinking about this now more as an investment, because for companies who are focused on their ESG credentials, there are other payoffs in terms of share price, better financing options, increased talent retention, improved sort of market share. So there's other corporate benefits to sustainability, even if it costs more on the travel side.
We're trying to attract talent into all of our organisations right now, and when you look at the graduate community, the young people coming into industries, doesn't matter which industry it is, it's one of the topics, the first questions they ask about the company's goals is focusing on sustainability. So, yeah, it's something that we all need to kind of focus our attention on, and there isn't an understanding. It's going to be at a cost, right?
It's going to be an arbitration for the companies between reducing travels or giving the freedom to the travelers to pick a more expensive travel, but with less impact. That's going to be the trick. and with what data. That's going to be the
But
trick.
I think we've also got to think about culturally, right, and regions, across regions, because the pace across the globe is going to be very, very different, right?
For sure.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm a chatty one. I just wanted to follow up on that point. I think the biggest bang for your buck in terms of sustainability is not to get on the plane. So actually the higher costs help because you can't take as many trips. So actually one of the biggest drivers for reducing the CO2 is not to go as often. So I do think the two are tied together. We've introduced parallel carbon budgets and cost budgets this year, and you can see the trend quite tied together.
So there is famously a Chinese character that means both danger and opportunity. So I'd like to know, having come out of this crisis, what do you see as the biggest opportunities ahead for travel managers? Maybe each of you can answer this one, but let's start with you.
Wow. We have to get our head out of fending off the business right now around the servicing and the challenges facing the industry, right? But I think, you know, the opportunities that are there are endless. It's at really starting your program from scratch and stop trying not to forget about volumes, but even thinking about how you're standing up your service, etc. You've got this real opportunity to evolve the way you manage travel within your organization, and you need to seize that opportunity because you'll never get another opportunity like it.
Time for reinvention. What do you see as the biggest opportunities, Pascal?
I think the added value of the travel manager has increased significantly. The world is more dangerous. The the financial costs are booming. So security, saving, the sustainability needs to be, as we saw, invented. So the added value that he brings to he or she brings to the organization has never been greater, and reinforces the polyvalence, you say, polyvalence of the role and the chief orchestra transversally.
So, better raison d'être.
Oui.
And Amy, what do you see as the opportunity?
So the survey results, 100%. So all of the travel managers that responded to that, 700 travel managers, all expect their job to be harder over the next 12 months, and half of them are expecting more pressure from leadership to demonstrate the return on investment of their role. So I would say the biggest opportunity really is to leverage the visibility and the network that you've created during that moment, during the moment of crisis, during the pandemic, will have given you a platform that you can now use to really help to influence your business in terms of the value that you bring and the value that your program brings.
So it's a challenge to top that or add to that, Michael. Can you?
I'm not adding a lot, but I'm pretty much saying the same as I said yesterday in the opening speech. I think we mentioned before, right? It doesn't make sense at the moment to look at 2019 data, right? And that's what you usually did. Usually we looked at the data of the year before, right? So and this is different now, meaning I can make pretty much everything different this year and the coming year. So it's a good time to actually reset your thinking and bring in complete new change on like what exactly you do, how you manage sustainability and so on, because you have different data that you can look at to prove that to your board, to whoever like you're also reporting into. And that's a good time. So it's a big opportunity.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, panel, for a great job. Please give them a warm round of applause. Thank you, Michael, Amy, Pascal, and Allison. Good job.
David.